Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, spent the last couple of weekends traveling around the state doing some presentations about self-defense law in Washington State. And one of the last things that we talk about at that seminar is what to do and not to do if, God forbid, you have been involved in a lawful self-defense shooting. Some of the people at the seminar thought, hey, you should probably just do a video on that little section. I thought, hey, that's probably a pretty good idea. Now, this is some advice that I hope none of you ever need, but it is good advice, and I think it's something you should make note of. So today, let's geek out for a little bit, and let's talk about what to do and not do immediately following a self-defense shooting. You watch the news, you read the headlines, and you know it for yourself. Your community is less safe than it was just a few years ago. So you decided to purchase your first firearm. But like everything else in your life, you wanted to do this lawfully and responsibly. So you trained and trained and trained. You learned the laws of self-defense and all the tactics necessary to protect yourself and your family. To this day, you continue to train, and you now live by the motto that it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. You are prepared for anything, or so you thought. Who are you going to call when it all hits the fan? Who's going to defend you for defending them? Who's going to stand in your corner when you realize that proof beyond a reasonable doubt means one thing in a high school civics class and something altogether different in the real world? Introducing Right to Bear, self-defense coverage that protects you so that you can protect them. With an attorney-answered hotline, you will always get a confidential conversation with your state's attorney. There are no cap limits for either criminal or civil defense. All forms of self-defense are covered, so from a fist to a firearm, you are protected. And you will have some of the nation's most passionate 2A attorneys defending you. And the peace of mind that you will have knowing that Right to Bear is in your corner, well, that's priceless. Listen, I've been in this industry long enough to know two things with absolute certainty. Good lawyers aren't cheap, and cheap lawyers aren't good. So visit my friends today at protectwithbear.com, and if you use the promo code WGL, you will receive 10% off. Listen, you need to protect yourself so that you can protect them. Visit my good friends at protectwithbear.com. Okay, so here's the hypothetical that we're going to operate from today. You are out in a lawful location, an unlawful attacker began to attack you, used force such that you were placed in imminent threat of death or serious physical injury, or you had a felony being committed upon your person. They left you no other option, and you have now deployed lethal force through a firearm in lawful self-defense. So for purposes of this hypothetical, we're going to assume that the firing upon the perpetrator was completely lawful. The perpetrator has now been struck. They are down. The threat is over. What do we do in that situation? And what you need to all understand, everyone, is that what you do in the next few minutes is going to really matter not only between life and death, because you can still get yourself killed here. It's also going to determine whether or not you actually have a defense. And if you do you start preserving critical components of that defense? Now, couple of caveats here. Every situation is going to be unique. Every situation is going to have its own tiny little nuance to it. And so this is generalized information. The other caveat is I always think you should consult with local attorneys in your jurisdictions, because every state has nuances to their self-defense law, and you need to understand that from a local perspective. The hypothetical is the gun is still in your hand, the smoke is still clearing, the firearm is still warm, the perpetrator is down, and at this point the threat is over. What do we do? Number one, let's reholster the weapon in exactly the condition it was at the time of the last discharge. Do not be sitting there picking up shell casings or anything like that. Just put the firearm away. Number two, very important, I think a lot of attorneys miss this. I would like you to remain at that location. However, sometimes legal violence will then lead to the need for other forms of legal violence when people start pouring out of the building from which the incident may have taken place outside of. There's friends associated with the would-be perpetrator. There's a lot of things that can turn this situation very volatile. I don't want you to be in a situation where you have to start lawfully pulling the trigger more than once now. If that is the case, if you cannot remain at that scene, because to remain at that scene is likely going to escalate, you need to extract yourself. Now, when I say extract yourself, I don't mean going to Mexico. What I do mean is going 2 or 3 blocks away and being able to explain to law enforcement why it is that you extracted yourself from the scene. Okay, third thing we need to do. We need to call 911. What, you say? Yeah, we need to call 911. Now, a lot of people always, when I ask this question in the seminar, why do you think you need to call 911? And it's always, well, you want to get your story in there first and all of that. It's none of that. It's really, really simple. If you believe that you have lawfully fired upon another human being in self-defense, then you also equally believe that you've been the victim of a crime. In fact, you believe that you've been the victim of a very serious crime, a crime that actually placed you or somebody else in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, a crime such of magnitude that needs to be reported to 911 immediately. So the purpose of the call is to report that you have been the victim of a crime. Something along the way of, some guy just tried to mug me, now we need medical attention at the corner of 4th and James. So what you need to provide to the 911 operator is your name, your date of birth, perhaps a description or item of clothing so they can find you, your actual location, the fact that you've been the victim of a crime, and if medical attention is needed, you should be asking for medical attention. We shoot to stop the threat. Under this hypothetical, the threat, I didn't say was dead, the threat is bleeding out, but the threat is also over. Does it help from an evidentiary standpoint if the defendant in a case of a self-defense that's the prosecution doesn't agree is self-defense, that they're requesting or being frantic about getting medical attention for him? Yes, that is very, very helpful evidence. So yes, medical attention should be requested. Now, for those of you who've spoken with 911 operators before, you will know that they do a fantastic job of keeping you on the phone. Everyone thinks they're doing this because they're trying to accumulate a bunch of evidence for the prosecution. Not true. What they are trying to do, though, is accumulate a bunch of information for law enforcement, because law enforcement will be arriving very shortly, and they know that there is an active shooting in place. That means they know somebody is armed, they know that there is danger, and they need to take control of that situation as fast as humanly possible. The more information that the 911 operator can retrieve is more information that they can then disseminate to law enforcement. The more law enforcement knows when they get there, the quicker they can take control of the situation. You are under no legal obligation to stay on the phone with the 911 operator. What I see happen frequently when people are involved in lawful shootings is they want to start selling the righteousness of it right away. They want to start explaining that they had every right in the world to pull the trigger. But folks, this is not the time to be doing it. If you don't believe me, ask any of your law enforcement friends what happens if they're involved in a shooting while on duty. It could be the most lawful, righteous shot in the history of the United States, and they're still not going to be talking to their department for several days. They will talk to their guild attorneys. Oh yeah, they'll talk to them right away. They're not going to make a statement to the department for days, okay? If they're not willing to do so, why should you be? So, after you've given all the essential information, hang up. Now, law enforcement is coming. And this is where we have to be realistic about things. Because even though we hold law enforcement to very high standards, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, I think sometimes we forget that they're humans just, like the rest of us. So really when they go to work at the beginning of their shift, they just want to go home to their families at the end. So when they get a call that we got a shooting in progress, an active shooter, an armed shooter, or something like that, you could imagine the emotional state that they are arriving in. It is a very volatile situation. And what you do or don't do in the next few minutes can be the difference between you living and hoping to be able to defend yourself and you dying as well. So this is what we need to do. Number one, when law enforcement shows up, please be able to identify yourself. I would walk up to them probably with my hands above my head. The firearm, if I had reholstered it as I instructed you to do, would be down right appendix. I would walk up to them. They would presumably recognize me from the description that I gave 911. They would ask if I was the 911 caller. I would say yes. They would ask if I am armed. I would say yes, and I would say it's down here on right appendix. Notice my hands never left my head. We don't want to be reaching for the firearm to show them that we are armed. Now, at this point, understand, law enforcement needs to disarm you. And law enforcement is still trying to figure out, are you a good guy with a gun or a bad guy with a gun? And they really got to err on the side of caution. So the disarmament of you may be tantamount to an arrest. You may be ordered onto the ground. You may be handcuffed. You may have multiple officers doing it. But they are going to disarm you. Do not resist or obstruct in this point. Okay, this is a great way to get yourself shot. So you are going to be disarmed. At that point, you may be cuffed and put into the back of the patrol car. They may actually just let you sit out there and talk to you. Lots going to depend on what other eyewitnesses are saying and what the evidence is showing and all of that stuff. But this is the most important thing. They're going to want to talk to you about what happened. They're going to want to hear your side of the story. And you're going to want to tell them that. You're really going to want to tell them that. But and this is if you don't listen to anything else on this video, just listen to this. The only statement I want you to make to law enforcement in this situation is, I'm sorry, I cannot and will not make any statements with you until I've had an opportunity to speak with my lawyer first. Now, many people will go, oh my God, they're going to think I'm guilty, I'm lawyering up. No. Good cops know exactly why you're lawyering up, because you're a smart person and you're doing the right thing for you. Even innocent people lawyer up. So again, the correct statement and the only statement, I don't care if it's the good cop, bad cop routine. I don't care if they're walking up saying, hey, it looks like it's a pretty good shot here. Why don't you just tell us what's going on? It does not matter. The only statement you are to make is, I'm sorry, I cannot and will not make any statements until I first had a chance to speak with my lawyer. Then you will speak with your lawyer. Then you will understand whether or not you have a story that's worth telling the law enforcement, or if perhaps you should shut your mouth. These are very general advice that I think universally applies in most instances like that. So, bottom line is if God forbid you are involved in a situation like that, reholster the weapon, try to remain at the scene if you can, call 911 right away to report that you've been the victim of a crime, give them enough information so they can find you, do not give them any other information, do not talk about the incident with the 911 operator other than you were a victim of a crime. When police arrive, be able to identify yourself, allow them to disarm you, and cooperate with the investigation, but keep your mouth shut and make no other statements other than, I'm sorry, I really can't talk to you until I've had a chance to speak with my lawyer first. Listen, as I mentioned, I hope you guys never, ever need any of this advice. If you got any more questions about this or anything else related to what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to get a hold of Washington Gun Law by now. If you don't, that's okay. That information is down there in the description box. And then finally, let's everyone remember that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.